going back a few months, so yeah, we started working with us Xiaogua Chinese and said that around the end of May, I think it was.
Yes.
Where were you back then with your Chinese level, compared to where you're now?
So
Like
when
what?
I first started, I
Yeah.
was, I think I was, the way I can measure my level was I was using like a certain app. I think it was the
Mm,
Chairman's Bow, which is kind of like do Chinese, but specifically like news articles. And
yeah.
I think I could comfortably read the HSK2 articles. And I
Mm,
think maybe I was scratching HSK3. Scratching
mm,
meaning like I could understand an article after reading it a few times and then looking a bunch of words up.
yeah.
Um, And then in terms of, and that's like my only measure,
Sure. What
was
was the main thing you were struggling with?
um, I did not practice speaking at all. Um,
Mm,
so if I were to actually speak to someone, I don't think I could have because that wasn't something I
oh yeah.
considered at all. Yeah.
And what were you wanting? What was the reason you were like actually wanting to like improve your Chinese more significant?
Yes. So I'm learning primarily because my girlfriend is Chinese and her parents don't speak English. And so it's a combination of, getting to know my girlfriend on a deeper level, understanding how she grew up in the culture, but then also having a
Awesome.
concrete goal of being able to communicate with her parents when I meet them.
Nice. And so yeah, our goal is in 8 months. Now you're about halfway there. Like what's changed? What's improved so far?
I think my conversational ability and listening skills in particular have improved
Mm,
a lot. Um,
how
so,
so?
for example, like I think the milestone moment for me was when I watched. I think Unit 4 is like the first unit put in the Xiaogua videos, for example, that in which Zhifei just switches to Chinese entirely. She doesn't use any English to explain anything.
Yeah.
And that's when I realized, like, oh, wait, actually, I can understand everything without having to replay the video, which
Wow.
was an incredible moment because I think, like, it's just a testament to, like, how much I learned previously.
Mm,
And like now, for example, since I have more time,
yeah.
considering that I'm in between jobs, there's like a show um, I watched a while ago before I started learning Chinese, and I watched it in
Okay.
English. I watched it with English subtitles, and like now, I'm actually able to like watch the show. I kind of use it as like learning material. Like I can watch the show and
Wow.
most understand what people are saying, but like this it's like a way for me to pick up new vocabulary, and I'm not confused by like the grammar. It's just like, oh, new word, okay, right now, and then keep playing and stuff. And so I think like that is also pretty cool that I can do that
That's
now.
awesome, man. That's super cool.
Yeah.
And how about in like the way that you've been learning? Like I guess what surprised you there?
I think the main change is that before I felt like this makes sense. I was either passively learning or focusing on consumption. So like
Mm,
initially it was just like, let me see if I can understand this article. And then I
mm,
never like really engaged with it. It's like, see if I can
mm,
understand the article, pick up new grammar and pick up new vocabulary. But now I still do that. That's like bread and butter activity for me. But I also like I think the introduction of shadow boxing, for example, has changed kind of the way I think
oh,
about it. So, like, for example, if I have time, ideally, if I have like a good
yeah.
solid chunk of time, what I'll do is, let's say I'm watching a show or some sort of YouTube video or reading something, I will engage with the material like I used to, which is like read it once, read it twice, pick up vocabulary. But then to actually like see if I understand the vocabulary slash kind of like ingrain it in my memory, but and understand new grammatical
Mm,
structures, I'll kind of pretend like I'm presenting this article to someone else and I kind of
oh,
explain like, oh, this is what the article is saying. And so that
oh,
way I kind of like
nice.
I practice my speaking, but then also learned new words as opposed to just like rotely memorizing sentences and words, for example.
Wow. That's excellent. Actually, I've love how you're using the what you enjoyed, which is reading articles, and now adding like this extra exercises to train the speaking on top of that. Nice job. Awesome. And how is that, I guess, reflected in terms of like, well, being able to speak with your girlfriend or girlfriend's parents?
So
How's that
actually,
changed?
well, before I didn't used to speak with them because I couldn't. It
Yeah.
was mostly just like she would call them. and then I would just be wave in the background. Um,
Yeah.
but I think recently I went, we were like in London, and I think my girlfriend doesn't, she doesn't really update them with like pictures or anything. And so I
Mm.
was like, oh, let me just do it for her. And so like I was in the pictures like, hey, this is us, like, this is the like this is Buckingham Palace in the background. We're here, and then look at that. And then I was just describing like we were doing, like, oh, we had breakfast. Like this is a
Wow.
full English breakfast.
You did that in Chinese?
Yes.
No way.
I mean, it's
That's
great because I
excellent.
could. I mean, I was texting, so it's a little bit
Yeah,
easier because I can look things up. But yeah, I think that's like that's a big step for me from just like waving hi from the
for
background.
sure. For sure. Now, how does that make you feel, like being able to do that?
It's great, especially considering that in my mind, like I've learned a language in college before,
Yeah.
um, and I think in my mind I always constantly compare
Mm,
like the rate, or not constantly, but every now and then I'll compare like, oh, how am I doing now? What can I do now? And how did
mm.
that compare to how I learned the language before? And I noticed that it's faster now. Like I
Oh,
think like I can say basic things, and it's been like 4 or 5 months now.
yeah,
So I can say some basic things, and care and understand like
totally.
50% of what people are saying. When I think like when I was previously learning a language, that took me like maybe a year and a half to get to that
Mm,
same level.
yeah. That's like very the most interesting part, at least from what I've learned, like from Jaffe, is that you don't need to. Oftentimes we think that we only practice speaking after a long time of trying to understand, but actually like working on everything at the same time just makes you go so much faster.
Yeah,
Like
it's pretty incredible.
pretty crazy. Yeah. Well, couple last questions. What do you feel yeah, in terms, I guess, in the way you're learning, like what have you actually enjoyed? You mentioned shadowboxing has been cool, but like in terms of enjoyment, like what have you been enjoyed?
In terms of enjoyment, well, I can say what I don't enjoy. Uh, I don't
Sure.
enjoy flashcards. Like even though I know they're actually quite important,
Mm,
um, I think flashcards are the thing I least enjoy, just because it's like it
it's the
feels,
tough part.
yeah, it's just like very mechanical, repetitive, something you have to get through. Um, so I think that's what I least enjoy. In terms of what I enjoy, um, I think I like the other prior material. I really like, well, I guess in terms of like the one-on-one stuff I do on my own, I really
Hmm.
like the shadow, the dictation,
Oh, awesome.
because I think it's like exposure to like different to people
Yeah.
actually speaking and seeing how much you can actually understand from that. I think that's what I most enjoy. And then in terms of outside of the one-on-one material,
Yeah.
I I really like the speaking clinics. I think at first, I like for
Hmm.
maybe like the first month or two, I didn't like them as much because
They're a
I
bit
had,
tough then.
yes, and then but I think once I got over the initial like I think it was more of a psychological hurdle than anything of like having these one-on-ones with someone. I started to like the speaking clinics a lot more, and I feel like they add a lot of variety to the material I get.
Hmm. How so, would you say?
Um, so I think like um, I think there's like three different speaking clinics. I've only attended two of them, but the two different segments or sections.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
the like Vita do Chinese story, and then um the stand-up comedy. And so I think like just it's a combination of, it's like a thing you kind of know in advance, like with stand-up comedy, but
For
then
sure.
it allows flexibility in the kind of material you get. And
Hmm.
I think also talking that over with someone is helpful. It's kind of like it's stuff you can and should do on your own, but then
Totally.
having someone doing that with someone else, I think is pretty fun.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. And this is, yeah, having that live interaction like just gives you another opportunity to train to speak.
Exactly.
So what would you like? Let's say there's someone who might consider jumping in, but they're like, yeah, maybe a bit hesitant for any reason, like 8 months is a long commitment or whatever. Like, what would you tell somebody who's considering that would consider jumping in, but maybe they're skeptical?
Um, if they're skeptical, how would I sell them? Um,
Or what advice would you give someone who's maybe been
ah,
struggling? Because yeah, for example, like that. Because well,
I
like for context, like a lot of people like luckily you were in the early stages, like just doing it Sherman's about for a year, but a lot of people have been doing it like for 5 years and they're barely at intermediate level still. And so changing habits, for example, it can be scary also.
yeah,
So what would you tell someone who maybe, yeah, would consider, but they're like, maybe not.
yeah. I think what I would tell them is um, and I think what I would tell them is that it's very hard at the beginning because
Mm,
focusing like if to get better at language is actually a bunch of skills that you have to practice.
yeah.
Um, and it can be very easy when you don't have a support system to
Mm,
focus on one or like what I was doing, which is like, oh, let me just focus on maybe reading. But then like if you
mm,
think about, I think a lot of people would enjoy, especially like if they're learning it for work, for example, like they actually want to
mm,
practice speaking. And so I think like having a support system in place can be helpful to make sure you're practicing like the four different skills like reading, listening, speaking, hearing.
yeah.
No, sorry, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, practicing the four
Yeah.
different skills, and making sure that like that you're practicing the four of them
Mm,
are is quite helpful. And I think like I don't think there's like many like for example, if you're literally using apps, oftentimes they will focus on a particular thing. So like if you're doing two
mm,
Chinese, it will train your listening and it will train your reading. Um, and if you're
yeah.
another app, like I think it's called like Skritter or something. It only like
Yeah.
helps you like stroke order and stuff. And so like unless
For sure.
you like are familiar with learning languages, it can be very easy to fall in the trap of like, oh, these are the tools I use, and then you only like learn through the tools. So I think like having a program
Yeah.
kind of like Xiaogua is like super helpful in getting that
Mm,
holistic understanding. Um, and then
totally.
also overcoming the like psychological barrier of like, oh, I have to be ready when the reality is like you will never be
Mm,
ready. Like no matter how good you get, like you'll like I might get to a conversational point, but like I'll probably still make errors or not have like a native accent. Like or like when someone a native speaker talks to me, they'll notice I'm not a native speaker. I mean, assuming you can't see
for
my
sure.
face, so like if they talk to me over the phone, they might notice I'm not a
Yeah.
native speaker. So there's like always like levels, and so I think like
Totally.
the
Totally.
having that support system can help overcome the
Mm,
psychological or the I guess not this. It's what is it called? It's the defeating. There's a term for it, right?
the imposter syndrome, or no?
Yeah, there's imposter syndrome, but there's also like the limiting belief is what I want to say.
Mm,
To overcome the limiting belief of like I can do X step when I am ready.
yeah. Yeah. That's such a good point. And yeah, I don't often think about that, but yeah, makes sense. And I see that. Oh, thank you for sharing that, by the way. It's yeah, super powerful, man. Like some otherwise people take years. And
Yeah,
Jaffe is gonna join us. I think she just had like a couple questions. And she'll do them
sure.
in Mandarin in Mandarin.
Okay.
And yeah.
Hello，
Hello，Hello Mary，你怎么样？
好，你呢？
我
你
也
在一样的
很好。
地方吗？
对，
好了
这个是
，Hello，
对对，我们现在在美国，呃，
哦，美国在哪儿？
在旧金山。
哦，好的，
对对对，我想看一看你的感觉，你现在学的怎么样啦？
现在我觉得开心，
开心，真的太棒了。你有跟你的女朋友说中文吗？
啊，有时候我们说中文但是大部分的时候我们用英语说话
你觉得你的口语有提高吗？
啊我觉得通过效果我觉得我的口语提高了
太棒了，太棒了。那你的你的听力呢？你能听懂更多吗？
是的，
太棒了。 好的，好的。你觉得还有什么你需要努力的？还有什么我们可以帮你的？
啊，我觉得我还是有问题，呃，跟呃跟听得懂呃不一样的口音，我
对，
比如我现在看一个呃我不知道怎么说，like TV show 啊、
电视剧，
电视剧，我现在
对，
看那个电视剧，呃在这个剧有很多的口音，我比如有东北口音，有南方口音，呃还有时候我听不懂人说什么。
嗯，你觉得发音呢？就是发音难不难？中文的发音，
发音是啥？
发音是你说话的这个 pronunciation。
嗯呃我不知道，你告诉我。
嗯，挺好的，我觉得挺好的。
谢谢谢谢。
对，因为我在想，那我们下一次的这个 master class 可以讲
嗯，
这个听的不同的口音。你对，你觉得上次的这个 learning habits 有用吗？
对，很有用。
太好了，你觉得你希望我们下次的 master class 讲什么内容？我来想一想，安排一下。
嗯嗯，我觉得口音呃会会用，我也觉得嗯有可能文化也
啊，
有用呃嗯
嗯，
嗯有可能嗯新闻。
新闻是
Well,
听
maybe for like speaking phonics.
啊，就是聊新闻吗？
啊，对啊，聊新闻。
聊新闻，好的，好，那我来想一想，我们可以准备一下。好，谢谢你，我没有什么问题，我只是来聊一聊。
好
Yeah,
的，
I think I'll pass the mic to Oscar.
好的。
Awesome.
呃
Hey, mute yourself.
嗯哼，
Wow. Wow, your speaking is actually so good. Like, I was not expecting that.
谢
Damn,
谢。
that's crazy. Oh, awesome, Maverick. That's all the questions that we had, and yeah, I think you blew my mind there. I was like, wow, crazy. Then we
Oscar, are you jealous?
a little bit, a little bit, yeah.
啊，
But it just shows what's possible. Just 4 months, crazy. But how much time are you dedicating per week, Maverick? Would you say?
Uh,
No.
I think at a minimum. So I think like a month ago, I was not dedicating much time because I was trying to leave my job.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't have that much time. But I think at a minimum, I'll spend, let's say, an hour a day. Um,
Awesome.
yeah, most of
Yeah.
that I would say is like apart from doing the homework would be like reading like few Chinese stories, but
Yeah.
specifically like I'll have this process where like I listen to the story without seeing any words, then I'll read it, collect the vocabulary, and then try again, and
Yeah.
then that's kind of like the bare
Mm,
minimum I will do.
excellent. Excellent. What do you feel? This is an extra question. Like, do you have a bit of extra time? I think we're
Yeah,
like going.
I think we have a well the calendar invites until
It was like 30.
the 40-minute mark. So if you have the
Okay.
time, I can answer any questions.
Yeah, I was really curious, like what's because sometimes like consistency is probably what people struggle with a lot. What has kept you, what belief maybe or habit has kept
Mm.
you actually like making sure you can do that 1 hour per day or being consistent like that?
Uh, I think it's a combination. I think it's maybe two things. I
Mm,
think it's because I tried to learn Chinese in the past. So
mm,
I tried to learn in high school.
mm,
And then I gave up because I think at that time I felt like uh, I didn't, I felt like memorizing characters was pretty hard. So I had like this understanding. Basically, if I couldn't get 100%, I'm not going to do
mm,
it. And so I decided, well, this is not for me then. Um, and then that's something I've regretted, like just
mm.
uh, having, like, I didn't want to basically be the kind of person who just like picks things up and drops them. And
Yeah.
so it's something I want to like kind of pick up for a while. And then now that my girlfriend is Chinese, I was like, okay, like this is like the a good catalyst to kind of tackle that now.
Mm,
And so that's kind of the one thing. It's like I don't like I've already restarted. It's like I don't want to drop it again. Is the one thing, and then the other is now that I have like concrete goals.
yeah.
So I think like in end of December, my girlfriend and I are going to go to China. It's like the first time she's gone in a while since she's come
Wow.
to the US, and I've never been. And so, like in my mind, I have the goal of like, oh, I'm going to meet her parents, so I want to be able to like converse with them. And so I have kind of those two things, like this identity
Thanks.
kind of like going back to like, I think the master class you had last weekend. It's like the identity piece, like
Mm,
it keeps me going, and then also having like the short term goals.